All right. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I think it is streaming now. Do the full video mode. Just waiting for the Twitch chat room to let me in. It does show that I'm streaming. Nope. Hey, anyone in here? All right, well, I'm in the chat room now. I'm just waiting for a few other people. All right, someone says they're not in there, but I see you. So Anthony sent me a text message saying his power is actually out. And I guess he has a backup generator that even though that's on, the internet connection is still down. So it's just going to be you, me, and JavaScript tonight. Trying to see how many people we have in here. Does the audio sound okay? Test, test. Okay, all right, good. The audio sounds all right. So, this is a fun week. We started working on the final project. And we've been talking about wireframes in the class, in the discussion boards, and people have been sharing some really good examples of wireframes. My goal for tonight is to show you a little bit of JavaScript that will go a long way. And the technique that I want to show you, or rather, there's a couple techniques, but what I want to show you is something from the Mid website that we created a couple years ago. We're pretty proud of it. It's called a hide-a-box. The reason I've selected this to show you is it's going to demonstrate a few pieces of JavaScript that you can mix and match differently than even the hide-a-box example to make some pretty powerful combinations. So if I go to the Mid website on our financial aid area, we have a website all about your financial aid options. And instead of having links that take you to separate pages about all these things, because there's really only like a single video or a couple paragraphs of content that we want to show, you can actually click on a topic to show just a couple, sentences, a couple paragraphs, or a video underneath it. And it allows navigation to be faster. And we've discovered that this works well in other contexts as well, such as in Moodle. You might have a question that you want to ask a student when they're reading an assignment, and it's not a major assessment like a quiz, but you want to ask them something and have them check their knowledge. And so we created the hide-a-box to allow you to ask a question and see an answer when you click on it. So I've put together a much more isolated version of this that we can play around with today. And I put it in a code pen because we created code pens for the class presentations, and that went really well. I wanted to use this as a teaching tool this semester. I also provided the files that you can download to look at this raw source code yourself. So in Atom, I'm probably going to switch along the way into the code that you can download. I have two versions of it. There's a starter file where it has the HTML and the CSS, and it has the required jQuery library that we're going to talk about tonight. But it doesn't have any of the code that we're going to write. I also gave you the completed version, which has all of the JavaScript that we're going to write tonight. And the version that I write tonight probably isn't going to have nearly as well documented comments along the way. So I tried to make sure that the comments in here are going to help you if you're trying to figure out what each piece of code is doing. So all of that is available in Moodle for you to download. I'm going to try to stick mostly in CodePen tonight if we can. I like how it, if I can zoom it up here, how it allows me to show either all three sections of code, the HTML, the CSS, and now to the JavaScript, as well as the preview on the right. But there will be times where I probably switch back to Chrome so we can use the console. If you remember the Web Inspector activity, the console is built into the Web Inspector, and you can type any code, and it's a REPL. It will read, evaluate, print out the result, and let us keep trying additional code things. So there will be times where you're going to write JavaScript and need some immediate feedback, and the Web Inspector with the console is still one of the best tools for that. So let's deconstruct the hide-a-box. Let's start with the HTML. Let me make that the large section here. So what's cool about CodePen is it adds those opening and closing HTML tags, the body tags, the title tags. I am just going to focus on the HTML that we have to write for the content that gets displayed. We have the H1 here. It's the hide-a-box examples, a paragraph wishing us well on our journey. And then I'm going to collapse these two sections. I have us starting out with just two hide-a-boxes on the page. But I want to make sure that whatever code we write today will allow us to have as many of these hide-a-boxes as we want. So I could actually copy one of these lines or one of these blocks of code and paste it back in, and CodePen is going to refresh with yet another hide-a-box on the page. So I'm going to say it's a secret, and now I've got 3 hide-a-boxes here waiting for me to click and use them. So that's the goal, is we're going to make some JavaScript code that is completely reusable no matter how many of these are on a page. And when I say something like that you can have multiple things on a page, I hope that you immediately start connecting that to classes. That's what makes this CodePen JavaScript work, is it's all tied to the existence of a couple classes, namely the hide-a-box class. Each one of these divs that I'm playing with here has a class that I added to it called hide-a-box. And let's take a look at what's inside. Let's peek under the covers. I'm going to collapse a couple of the things. It really boils down to 2 things: a toggle button and a secret. Within a hide-a-box, there's a thing that you want to keep secret. You don't want it shown. And then you have to have something that you can click on to reveal the secret. So really, inside of each one of these hide-a-boxes, if I open them up, you're going to see it boils down to the toggle button and the secret. Now, the actual tags on these don't matter so much, but in my example, these are H2s for the toggle button and then a div that contains the secret. But like I said, the tag names don't matter so much. In my other video that I posted from a previous semester, I had said that we were trying other tags for our hide-a-boxes, something for accessibility purposes that works a lot better than just an H2 as a clickable target would be like a button. So you can literally type button instead of H2, and everything works just as well as it did before. Now I've got a button that I can click on, and a screen reader knows that a button is clickable by default. So in some ways, this might make it a more accessible version of the hide-a-box. I'm showing this to you just so that you know that this only significant pieces to this HTML structure are the classes. That's where we're going to attach our JavaScript functionality. So let's put that back to an H2, shall we? Okay, so we've got the H2, and then we've got the secret. The secret is wrapped in a div right now with a class of secret. You could easily replace this with a span. You could make it be a form, a table, a video. It could be a single field in a form if you wanted to have a button that lets you add an additional field item. I see that on the web all the time. Know that you can mix and match a lot of these pieces once you understand the importance of the classes instead. All right, let's peek underneath that H2. So the toggle button inside of it does have some content. It has an anchor tag, a hyperlink, and it has an I tag, which long ago that used to be an italics indicator, but we don't really use the I tag anymore because it doesn't really convey meaning. We use the emphasis tag as a replacement. That's freed up the I tag as a valid HTML tag that doesn't really have any meaning. So one of my favorite icon libraries, called Font Awesome, takes that I tag and pretends that it's an icon tag which is kind of a neat trick. So I've added Font Awesome to this CodePen, and it's something that we use on our website. If I search for Font Awesome on here, you'll see that it's a free icon library that you can add to your website. And it has, it has a pro level. They want to tell you about that, of course. But if you take a look, it has over 1,500 free icons. And there are icons from those chevrons that I showed you to even, I think they've got some rocket ships in here, if I could spell rocket. So if you wanted to make a space shuttle icon, you don't have to draw it yourself. You could adopt the Font Awesome library. And it can be whatever size you want. It scales as big as the text. So how do you use this? I said it was tied to the I tag. If you look at the files that I sent you for you to open up in Atom, I have included the CSS that makes Font Awesome work. In the settings for the CodePen, that's where underneath the CSS tab, I have added Font Awesome version 4.7 here. And there's actually a far newer version of Font Awesome. In the settings for the CodePen, you can just search for what you want to include. And if I search for Font Awesome, you'll see that they're already almost up to version 6 now. If you wanted even more icons. Probably the version that I included in this CodePen is sufficient for things like chevrons and most common icons. But some of the prettier ones like that space shuttle might not be available in the version that I have in the CodePen. And let me jump over to the Atom version. In the starter, you'll see that I include this link tag to that Font Awesome library right there. So it's just CSS that you include, kind of like how we included Google Fonts. You can actually include all of these images with CSS as well. So let's go back to our Hide box. I wanted to explain where that crazy chevron was coming from. That's what that I tag represents. I, of course, have the word grants. The reason that I chose to wrap this icon and the word grants inside an anchor tag is so that it picks up on the default behavior of a link that is clickable. When you hover over it, it's clickable. It's blue by default. It has an underline. I thought that that was good behavior for these because they looked like links that would do something. So really, anything could go inside of this toggle button, but we wanted to make sure that we had some wording and a link on it. If I open up the secret, that's a little bit more flexible. It can be anything you want, like I showed you from the mid example. But for now, it's just a paragraph. So that's the HTML. Let's take a look at the CSS. I did write some CSS, not a lot. The most important thing that I did with this really quite specific descendant selector is I wanted to make sure that anything in the toggle button would turn my mouse cursor into the hand. So if I hover over the word grants, you'll see it turns into a hand. But even if I hover over the chevron, which was not inside of the link, or actually I think it was inside the link, wasn't it? I guess the better example is if I hover my mouse way over here on the right-hand side, this entire H2, this box that represents the H2, turns my mouse into the pointer so that I know that it's clickable. So that's just one little CSS selector I wrote here to make it clear what pointer to show. The other thing that I did is I adjusted the size of the icon. If I didn't have this line in here and I let it refresh, the Font Awesome chevron is going to be the same size as the text, and I think that that is a little bit ridiculous. So we shrink that down just a little bit to like 3/4 of the size that it would normally be. That's what the 0.75 of the size of the unit M means. So you could shrink that even smaller. I think I showed that in my other video. But on our website, we found that 0.75 M was a good place to start. So that's the CSS. There's not much there. You could definitely expand upon this, change the design with just a little bit more CSS than what I wrote. The magic happens in the JavaScript, and I have done my best to write some comments that will explain this CodePen better. There are three main things that we're trying to do. We're going to be hiding the secret as soon as the page loads. You'll notice that they're not visible here. We're going to allow that secret to become visible when you click on any one of these hide boxes. We want their secret to be shown. And we're actually going to flip that chevron around. Notice how when I click on grants and the secret is shown, the chevron flips from down to pointing up. And in order to do this, we're going to have to use a couple of little pieces of JavaScript. We're going to have to learn how to find different DOM elements using jQuery, where the web inspector is going to be a good companion for us. We're going to walk up and down the DOM, and we are going to modify the elements that we're selecting on the web page. The main thing that we're doing is making something visible or hidden, and think of the display property in CSS. That's going to be the secret there. Now, all of this is going to be possible because we're listening for the click event. So we want our web page to be interactive for the first time. We're going to listen for when something is clicked and do something when it is clicked. And that's what the last step is we're going to actually manually trigger an event ourselves. Typically when the page loads, we're going to do that. So all the JavaScript is here already. We're going to delete all of it and start from scratch tonight if we're feeling brave. So you'll notice that with that JavaScript removed, we are back to a web page that shows all the secrets from the beginning. And I think that this is a good place for me to switch back to Chrome just for a minute, where I've got the Hide-a-Box starter open already. And I've opened up the web inspector. Remember, you can just right-click and open up inspect. I know that we've typically been working in the elements area, but we're going to go over to the console just for a minute to review a couple basic JavaScript aspects. The first thing that I want to remind everyone of is what JavaScript functions look like how you call a function. And the one that I think we played around with a little bit when we were doing the web inspector activity was the alert function. I'm just checking the chat room here. Can everybody still hear me pretty well? Sweet. Okay. All right. So the alert function, it's named alert. That's the easy part. When you're going to try to send data to the alert, to try to make a message appear, you have to surround it both in parentheses that open and close, and then you have to put the message in here. And if you're going to type words, they actually have to be in double quotation marks or single quotation marks. The moral of the story is they have to be wrapped in quotation marks so that you can actually write words. And so the first program everyone writes when they're learning to write in a new language is hello world. So we're going to write that now. Alert, and then the message that we're sending is sent in parentheses and wrapped in these quotation marks. And typically in JavaScript, you end everything that you write with a semicolon. As soon as I hit enter, that's going to be read, evaluated, print. And what happens is on the top of my browser here, it says hello world. Yay, that worked. We've all written the first computer program that you do in a beginning to programming class. Notice how it returns undefined here. It did its work of printing the message, and there's no return value for alert. If you were to type like a math equation like 1 + 1 and hit enter, it actually returns the result of 2. So what's interesting about alert here is all that does is print something out to screen, and it doesn't return anything. It just says there's nothing to return. So that's using the alert function. The next thing I want to do is introduce you to jQuery itself. In this class, we could teach you raw JavaScript, but traditionally and historically, there have been small differences between how JavaScript works in different browsers. Back in the old day, that was the difference between Internet Explorer and something like Netscape. In the modern world, most browsers have much easier to use functions, but there are still subtle differences between, say, Safari and Microsoft Edge, or Firefox and Chrome. So a lot of JavaScript development in the modern world is actually done in helper languages. And there are a bunch of ones out there. So you may have heard of something like React or Vue.js or Ember or Angular. Sorry, the name escaped me. There's so many JavaScript frameworks out there. They help you write JavaScript in less code that works in more browsers. the most popular one still today is probably something called jQuery. Oh, in the chat room, someone asked, wasn't there ECMAScript back in the day? ECMAScript probably is the actual most appropriate name that I should be calling this type of script that we're writing. ECMA is the consortium that designed the specification for JavaScript. Everyone just calls it JavaScript though, so ECMAScript and JavaScript are the same thing. It's just not as classy of a name, I guess, to call it ECMAScript. So you'll hear me call it JavaScript, which I should say is significantly different than Java. I know that a lot of us like to say that we're going to be programming Java in this class, but it is JavaScript, which is markedly different than Java. Java requires a whole different step of running on a computer or device, whereas JavaScript runs in the browser itself. So that's a fun tangent on what's in a name. Let's get back to writing some JavaScript. So I didn't want to teach you all of the methods that ship with every browser. What I wanted to do is pick something that's pretty portable and works on every browser. So jQuery still happens to be that. So in Atom, you'll see that at the bottom, I have included jQuery. It's a really old version of jQuery. It's 1.11. I think jQuery is up to at least version 3, if not higher. But for the code that we're writing tonight, there's really nothing too sophisticated about it, so we're fine using older versions of jQuery. If you are in CodePen and you go to the settings, you'll see that I added jQuery 3 because that was the oldest available at the time to this CodePen example. When we include that code, the browser loads up all of jQuery when the page renders. So we have access to jQuery methods in our console because we're on that web page that has jQuery loaded. jQuery allows you to write really powerful and quick little snippets of code that do a lot. And the shortcuts that it provides are like universal now. So everyone who's writing in a lot of other languages knows that you can start out writing shortcuts now with the $, which is actually just a variable. So $, represents sending a message to jQuery. What we're going to do is use the shortcut that lets you select elements in the DOM. So $, is the function name. And then we're opening and closing parentheses, and we're going to type in, within the double quoted strings, we're going to type in a selector to grab some items on the page. We're going to try to find things in the DOM. And what we're going to look for are anything with a class of HideaBox. So I am actually writing a CSS selector here, .HideaBox. And jQuery is able to turn that HideaBox class, that .HideaBox, into all the JavaScript code needed to find all of the HideaBoxes on this web page. Let me try to hide my video or shrink it a little bit here. So if I open up the results here, Chrome actually lets me look inside. You'll see that it found 2 divs with a class of HideaBox, and I can actually hover over them and it gets selected on the page. That is a really powerful a shortcut. If I was using the browser native functionality, this would actually look like something like document.get elements by class name, and I would have to just pass in the word HideaBox. And this is totally doable. It's not that much longer, but the fact that I can use CSS selectors with jQuery is a superpower. So that's why I have us use jQuery. So we are going to just start playing around with selecting elements in the DOM and manipulating them. The first one that we're going to write actually isn't just on the HideaBox. We're going to try to do something with the buttons. That's the first thing the toggle button is what we want to select to add some interactivity. So let's think about what selector we could write for that. We could totally just write a selector that searches for the class of toggle button. That does get 2. But at mid, we were actually worried that we might put toggle buttons in other places on our website without the context of a HideaBox around it. So we actually decided to write a really specific descendant selector, which you can pass to jQuery. So we actually wrote .HideaBox space .toggle-button as our selector in our version of the HideaBox. And when I hit enter, you'll see that 2 items are still returned, and it's the 2 HideaBox buttons that we are most interested in. So that is our first selector that we want to work with. me double check the chat room, make sure I'm not missing anything here. All right. Well, we have this. Let's try taking this over into our CodePen and start doing something with it. So I'm going to copy this selector, and I'm just going to paste it in here. And the first thing that I want to do is make something happen when I click on them. So there is a way to specify an event handler on each of these, and it's with the word on. That's the function that we're going to call. Now we have to pass a couple parameters to this function. We need to tell it what event to listen for. And when you read, I think it was chapter 22, you probably saw a huge table of all the different types of events that happen, like on scroll, click, hover. Those are the most common ones. We're going to focus just on click today. But we want something to happen when I click the toggle buttons. So on takes a couple parameters. The first thing it takes is what we're listening for, and we're listening for click. And then we have to send it some code to run when these toggle buttons are clicked. The code that we want to send it is not, it's a little bit different than you might think. In fact, I think I made this mistake in the video that I posted already. I started out by trying to write the word alert here. Like I wanted every time a click happened on one of these to alert something out. But you can't just send it the code that you want it to run. You have to actually wrap that up. You have to package that up in a function that gets called. So I showed in the previous video how to write an anonymous function. So an anonymous function is like the definition of some code that you want to run. And I need to make this just a little bit bigger so we can see it wrap. So a function is just a set of code that you want to run, and you can actually give it a name. Like we could define a function called do something, and then we would actually just be able to say on click do something. That could be the name of the function that we put in here. But then we'd have to get into how to define a function, and although that is covered in chapter 21 and 22, I think it's easier just for us to write the extra steps to writing an anonymous function. So you have to say I'm passing a function, and then you use these open and closing curly braces to represent the beginnings and ends of the code that you want to run. So I like to write the opening curly brace there and then start on a new line. So the code that I want to run is alert you clicked me. And it's a good thing for us to end that with a semicolon and also end this line that we had started on 18 with a semicolon. So with a little bit of luck, we have now selected all the toggle buttons on the page that are underneath the hide boxes. And whenever they are clicked, they will run this section of code that we're sending it. Oh, and it is working. So I clicked on it, and you'll notice that as soon as I dismiss the alert box, all of the links turn purple. And that's because it actually did navigate us to a web page. Remember in the HTML that inside of my toggle button, I had this anchor tag, and it's pointing to a page called #. That is a valid web page. It's actually the current web page that you're on. So it navigated me there, and so it thinks I've been to this page before, and it turned all these links purple. Well, one trick to the link, the anchor tag, is you can actually prevent this hide a box toggle button from ever allowing the click to go to the hyperlink that it was going to, and that's by returning a value. So we're going to call the return method here and pass it false. So that means when it's done alerting, it doesn't follow through and go to the web page that we gave it. It's going to just abort right away and say return false. So now when I click on these, the links stay blue because I've never actually left the page. That's a little bit better behavior. So we're going to leave that return false. So that's pretty good. We've selected and found DOM elements, and we're registering event handlers already. So we've got two of the concepts down. Let's do something besides pop up an alert box. Let's delete that. What do you say we try to do something with the secret? So I'm going to write a selector that I'm sending to jQuery that looks for the secrets. So that would be the double quotes, and I'll write secret in there. You know what? And I guess we were also worried about having more than one secret on a web page that wasn't in a hide-a-box. So we're going to look for all the hide-a-box secrets. And we're just going to run a method called toggle. This comes from jQuery. In fact, let me pull up the jQuery web page. On the jQuery web page, if you click on API documentation, you can actually search through all the methods that are available in jQuery. And I like to use the Control F or the Command F on a Mac way to search through a web page. And I'm going to search for toggle, and it's further down. If I click on this web page, it has all the details of what you send toggle, and including a bunch of options. But more importantly, it shows you examples of how to run toggle. Toggle, in short, I think the description says it well, display or hide the matched elements. So the way this works is actually to basically apply the CSS property of display none, or display block, I think, by default. And it sets it to whatever the opposite of its current state is. So now that I've set toggle here, if I click on one of these items, you'll see that the secret shows and appears. But it's not quite what I want, because if I click on one of the toggles, it makes all the secrets appear or all the secrets disappear, which isn't quite what we wanted, right? The hide-a-box is not isolated in its own world. It's affecting all the other hide-a-boxes, and that's because of this selector. So there's actually a secret power in jQuery. When we are inside of this hide-a-box, inside of this function, we actually have access to what was clicked through the keyword this. So instead of passing a selector in a string, I can actually just use the word this. And this represents, the word this represents whatever it is being clicked on up here. All right. So what are we going to do? Well, we don't want to toggle. Remember, I'm clicking on the toggle button. I don't want to do anything to the toggle button. I want to do something to the secret. But if I take a look at this HTML, we've got a problem here. We have the toggle button has to affect the secret, and it's not underneath it, right? It's a sibling essentially. It's not the secret is not a child of the toggle button. Instead, it looks like the secret, like I said, is a sibling. So in order to get to the secret, I would have to walk up the DOM to the hide-a-box and then back down to find the secret. So this is where I want to show you how jQuery has a couple methods that let you traverse up and down the document object model. And we're going to do it from our starting point, which, like I said, is this, which represents the toggle button that was clicked. So what we want to do is go up to where we find the item with a class of hide-a-box. And to do that, we're going to use another method that jQuery gives us called closest. So I'm adding the dot closest, and then in the parentheses, I want to send it the selector that we're looking for. So I want to find the nearest hide-a-box class, which in a perfect world is going to be the immediate parent. And then we actually want to go back down. So if I go back to this jQuery page, closest was on here. For each element in the set, get the first element that matches the selector by testing the element itself and traversing. That means going up through its ancestors in the DOM tree. So that's going to find us the hide-a-box. After that, we want to go back down, and the method for that is called find. Find gets the descendants, and it loops through them, going deeper and deeper from the starting point. So we're going to add on find, and we have to pass a selector in here. So we're going to find the secret, which is a class that we pointed out earlier, and we're going to toggle that. So with a little bit of luck, when I click on one of these toggle buttons, instead of all the secrets disappearing, just the one should disappear. And it works on grants. Let's try Isn't It Cool? Yes, yes, it is cool. And yes, it's still a secret. Okay, so this is honestly most of the interactivity that we really want for a hide-a-box. There's just one little problem here. Well, I guess there's a couple things that we can add on. Notice how when I'm clicking on the toggle button, that chevron is staying alone. We could come back here in a little bit and figure out how to do something with that chevron. But I think that the bigger thing that we want to address is the fact that we want all the secrets to be hidden by default. And so I'm going to jump ahead here to the last bit, which was triggering event handlers. What we decided at mid was we wanted the content that was hidden to still be searchable by Google. But when Google is crawling web pages, it's not going through and clicking on everything to make stuff appear. And oftentimes, other bots on the web, like for Bing or for other search engines, are crawling the web without JavaScript enabled. So we wanted to make sure that instead of using CSS to hide the content, we wanted the web page to show the content by default, but as soon as the web page loads, hide the secrets. And so we triggered the event handler ourselves. So we can actually find all the toggle buttons. And how do we do that? Well, we wrote the selector for that already. It was find the hide boxes and then the toggle buttons underneath them. And we wanted to trigger an event handler. You can actually just call click. And so when that refreshes, oh no. There we go. I lost it by hitting Command R for a minute there. I'm so used to saving in Atom and hitting refresh in Chrome that I did it here. When the web page loads, it will automatically come down and click each one to hide it for you. And we found that this was a nice balance to making sure that the content was shown to Google and shown to people who might be browsing your website without JavaScript, which admittedly is very rare. But I know a few people that try to browse the web with JavaScript disabled by default. So if we take a look in here, we have selected things in the DOM. We've walked up and down the DOM using closest and find. And we've registered event handlers. That's with the click. And we've triggered those event handlers ourselves. So we actually triggered a click ourselves. And all of this is documented on the jQuery webpage. If you wanted to read more about click, you could search for that on the webpage. That binds an event handler to the click JavaScript event, or it triggers that event on an element. And that's what we did. We selected some elements and we clicked them with a single line of code, which is kind of cool. This leads to some interesting automation. You can actually write JavaScript that clicks and does things to different elements. So I myself have written JavaScript code on the console to help fill out forms more quickly, which is just fun that you can do that in the console. So this is a pretty functional hide a box in and of itself, but there's a few things that we want to do to finish the project. Let's get back to trying to move that chevron around. If we take a look at the HTML again, you'll see that the thing that defines this icon is a class of FA and then the other class attached to it, because you can have more than one class on an element, is FA chevron up. If I just write down in place of up, you'll see that that effectively flips the chevron upside down. So Font Awesome comes with a couple different classes. When you ask for FA chevron up, it renders this one down here, and if you change it to down, it points it down. So if we could find a way when we click the toggle button, in addition to toggling the secret, we could flip or change the class of this icon, then that'd be groovy, right? So let's put it back. And the best place to do this is actually right where we're toggling the secret. We're just going to write another line of code. In fact, let me start adding some comments in here. So we're going to say show or hide the secret. And then we're going to add another comment here that says flip the chevron. And a lot of the code is going to be similar. Luckily for us, if we're looking at HTML again, the icon is underneath the toggle button. So there's no need for us to go back up to the hide box and back down. We can actually search for the icon that we're going to adjust inside of the toggle button. So that's one fewer jQuery methods that we have to call. So we can write this, and instead of closest, we can just write find. And we're going to find the closest Font Awesome icon. So each of those icons has a class of .fa. And what we found in practice on our website is we use those icons all over the place. So we only felt comfortable assuming that the first icon needed to be toggled or flipped upside down. So we actually added another jQuery method called first. So we're just going to get the first font awesome icon. And that's the one where instead of toggling the visibility, which I'm just going to write that right now, I can toggle the visibility and you'll see that the icon disappears when I click it. Oh, well, why did that find dot? Oh, we want, instead of .fa, I want to do I.fa, I think. There we go. So we want to find the icon with the class of FA. Got to be careful with your selectors, friends. We only wanted to change the icon on the first one. So instead of calling toggle, what we really want to do is change the class. It just so happens that when I was searching for toggle one day, I found that right after toggle, there was one called toggle class. So you can add or remove one or more classes from each element in the set of matched elements, depending on the class's presence or the value of the state argument. Now that's a long sentence, but the examples show some good examples. Instead of having to write methods for adding and removing classes, you can actually just call toggle class, and whatever you want to happen is what you list next. So the example that I want to show you is instead of toggle class, we want to pass in the state that it was in. So that was FA chevron up space FA chevron down. I sometimes like to put commas in here to separate them, but it turns out you just provide two different classes separated by a space. And it's going to know to switch this one with this one. Or if it is down already, it swaps it around to the other way around. So if I click on these now, you'll see that the icon changes around. Now these could be any icons you want. So you could start with FA chevron up, and then you could switch it with FA email or something weird. I guess email isn't an icon. Let's see if mail is. Nope. FA Font Awesome 4. Let's see what the Font Awesome 4 icons included. I don't know their names anymore. Is there a rocket in here? Yeah, there was a rocket. It was shaped a little bit different. Let's put FA rocket back in here. So now we're toggling between those two icons. But I think you get the picture. We're going to go back to the chevron up and down icons. So when you click on one, it hides and shows the secret with toggle, and then it doesn't hide and show it. It switches one class for another. So we're flipping the chevron. So we hide the secret when the page loads. We make the secret visible when you click the toggle, and we flip the chevron when you click the toggle. All three items have been accomplished on our list. Now, this is where I need to pause and say that in the final version of the code that I let you download for the Hide box, you'll see that I wrapped all this code in one more function. And that's because you can't control the speed at which the browsers these days will download and execute JavaScript. It is entirely possible that the browser is going to execute all this JavaScript before the web page itself has loaded, because it's trying to do things super fast. So what we want to do to ensure that everything works is wrap all this code inside a function that only is going to be called when the web page is ready. So to do that, let me get to the right part in my notes here. You select something else. So we'll use $, and we're going to select the document, and we're going to use a different event. Instead of click, we're going to wait for .ready, and we're going to write a function that gets called here. Now I've memorized this in my life because I've worked with jQuery so much. essentially what we're doing is waiting for the browser to actually tell us that the DOM is done loading. So anything that you're going to have load on your page, I would recommend you wrap inside of this code. So I'm going to put the semicolon there. I'm going to take this code that we wrote before and just put it inside of here. Did I get it all in? My indentation is not ideal here. There we go. That looks a little bit better. Now, CodePen never had this problem. I think there's something that they do to try to make sure that the DOM is loaded before it executes your JavaScript. But if you were testing this in another browser, some are going to try to execute that JavaScript so fast that you really need to wait for the document to be ready first. So this is the complete working example that should be pretty close to what we had over in the final version of the Hide-A-Box here. So let's review what we did. We wrote some code that waits for the web page to be done rendering. The DOM has to be ready for us to use. Then we attach a click handler on each of the toggle buttons. What code is going to be run when a toggle button is clicked? Well, we use some fancy jQuery to find the secret and make it visible, or when it's clicked while it's visible, it changes it to hidden. And then we added a little bit of other jQuery code that walks up and down the DOM to find the icon and flip the chevron up or down with class names. Then lastly, before that's done, we make sure that it isn't going to follow the destination of that link. That's all the code that we're wiring up to happen on the toggle button. That all goes inside of this .on. The other thing that we do when the DOM is ready, before we're done with our document ready function, is we tell the browser to go ahead and click on all those toggle buttons, and that effectively hides them all. You can't even see it. It loads so fast. If you refresh the page over and over, it only essentially shows the final version of the web page with everything hidden. So that's pretty cool. We've built our very own Hide-A-Box, and I encourage you to play around with this, try to break it, maybe try to make it do something a little bit different. In your final project, you're going to be required to do something with JavaScript to add some level of interactivity. And I'd like to point out that you can do more with these same functions than what I'm doing. But the concept of hiding and showing content is actually pretty flexible in and of itself. So you might be able to add a button that makes your contact form appear, or a button that loads a different image, or a button, maybe it doesn't do anything with visibility, maybe it adds a class. In fact, all the cool animation that you're seeing on the web probably comes from some sort of sequence of animation that occur on class names. You can actually create class names that have animations tied to them and transitions tied to them. So if you can wire all that up with a class, then you can have buttons or other interactivity on the page that as you scroll up and down, it adds a certain class to an element, and so it fades in. There's a lot that you can do with this combination of jQuery, of finding elements in the DOM, walking up and down, adding classes, removing classes, or just toggle in and of itself. So I hope this gives you some ideas of what to do on the final project. Is there anything that I can show in more depth on this Hide-A-Box example? I know we've got a few viewers hanging out here. What other ideas do you have for toggling and changing classes? What comes to mind, friends in the chat room? While I'm waiting for people to brainstorm, I'm going to see if I can look up a CSS transition real quick. You know what? I should find a CSS transition from the Mozilla Developer Network. So as I hover on these, the margin is changing on these. So that's the transition property. I know a few people have been looking into that. You could do a lot of cool things on this based on hover, but you could also use buttons to add a class that adds the transition when you click a button or at certain times on a page. So classes and these little concepts will go a long way towards helping you with your final project. All right. Looks like no one wanted to share any ideas in the chat. So are there any other questions before we end tonight? All right. Well, I'm going to try to get this recording posted tomorrow in the Moodle shell. I'm hoping that you're having good luck finding wireframes and making your own wireframes of 3 different pages in your website. I can't wait to see these final projects come together. And I know Anthony was giving feedback on the proposals from the other week. So we'll talk to you again next week. Good night, everybody.